off air, of course. Well, I imagine immigration status is going to come up. Millennial Mac, did I, in fact, make that remark to you?
You did. You did indeed.
And continuing to question the witness, would you like to share your response? Do you recollect what you had to say to me in response?
Well, you said the first question I have is, what was his immigration status? And I said, I don't know if that would be my first question. So that's kind of was our discourse.
Well, and
yes.
and thereby are the horns of a dilemma that we're going to get into right now. Because, I don't know if journalists in Music City did a lot of digging on this. Apparently, the information was volunteered. At any rate, and help me out on this, being the media maven you are, Millennial Mike. Hey, it's Millennial Mac, the media maven. Wow. There's our alliterative phrase for this Thursday. Okay, so media maven Millennial Mac. They still call in the newscast on WSMV TV News 4 Nashville, or have they changed that whole shtick?
Yeah, Channel 4. Yep, that's it.
Okay, there's
Channel
still
4.
Channel 4, WSMV, familiar with it, longtime NBC affiliate, and we won't get into the family tree of the old radio companion, etc. Lauren Lowry had anchor duty the other night, and she passed along what Mac and I have been talking about in the lead-in to a report. Let's listen to Lauren Lowry, WSMV anchor, introducing a follow-up report, cut 1.
The longtime soccer coach arrested for drugging and raping children came into this country illegally. Officers say Camilo Campos sexually assaulted boys over a 20-year period. Our Brendan Tierney has a look at what's being done tonight to make sure victims feel safe to come forward.
All right, here's what's happening. The priorities, the narrative changes. Now, left unsaid are a couple of ifs. If the majority of victims were in fact Hispanic, and if those victims came here illegally, then the suspect used the lax enforcement of immigration laws basically to work for him, knowing that would cover up the deeds. And so that becomes the angle now. The whole notion of the ills of illegal immigration go out the window. We're not going to talk about that, and it's time for the cops to play officer friendly. Hey, if you're here, what the heck is immigration law compared to this? I mean, isn't it cruel to bring up? Now, pardon me, I have to cough. Now I've returned from my brief coughing spell. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it, but what the heck? I want to be totally candid with you, but not as candid as Joe Biden's recent octogenarian sunbathing there on the Delaware shore. So Brandon Tierney comes on. He's the field reporter. And here is the preferred angle on the story. It's not only the kids who were raped who are victims. It is the entire Hispanic community, especially those who are here illegally. And there's a problem for those who broke the law to come here for a better way of life, because the Department of Homeland Security is now involved in the investigation. Let's listen to Brandon Tierney set the scene from the field, cut 2.
Franklin police say the Department of Homeland Security is now involved in the investigation of Camilo Campos. Community organizations are now working to make sure that this development doesn't stop victims from coming forward.
So the angle on the story is about to really emerge because it's personified. I don't know if this was enterprising out of the newsroom, and having been a refugee from local television news, or I shouldn't say a refugee, I should say a grizzled veteran of local television news from Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, to Greenville, Spartanburg, Asheville, to Cincinnati, and then more years ago than I'd care to count, to Phoenix. Every morning there's the assignment meeting. And in the old days, the newspaper used to drive, back in the old days, what's the paper saying? That's just the way it went on. And the idea was you would advance the story, and there are some agencies within the community who want to advance their take on the story. So that's what happens with the Focus, the one guy interviewed for the story. To my recollection, when this thing was on the other night, there no cops appeared on camera from Franklin, nobody from Homeland Security, nobody from, I think we still call it ICE. Instead, the president and CEO of the Nashville Area Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and his name is Yuri Kunza. And the narrative, part of the narrative that the young reporter Brandon Tierney uses is that Yuri Kunza is, quote, still trying to process what happened, end quote. Left unsaid, of course, and this is just the reality, part of the process is changing the narrative. The crimes are bad enough, don't misunderstand me, but part and parcel of this is to say, if you're here illegally, don't view the police as a threat. Please come forward. Now, what's very curious is the audio, the clips of, or the sound bites, as we used to say in the old day. Yuri Kunza, the president and CEO of the Nashville Area Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, doesn't talk. Never will you hear him talk about illegal immigration or even migrants, at least not in the sound bites selected for the story that appeared on Channel 4. Instead, he says the language barrier is the problem. Cut 3.
Most of the times it's the language barrier what keeps people from engaging with the local government resources that may be available.
Okay, all right. True as far as it goes, but it prompts from your not so humble guest host these 3 observations. The way it should be, if you want to take full advantage of living in America, come here legally and learn to speak English. But as I wrote about in a book that I penned now a decade and a half ago, when I had legislation that George W. Bush refused to even consider, the Enforcement First Act, when you fail to enforce immigration laws and you bow to the kind of, before we called it woke, we talked about multiculturalism, that each culture is equally valid, and somewhere along the way we got rid of the notion of Americanization, of assimilation. And now, since the laws aren't being enforced, there's no incentive either to obey immigration laws or to assimilate. Number 2, and it's worth, you just peel back, we'll just pull back the curtain on this. In Washington, D.C., the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has become the biggest promoter of open borders and cheap labor on the planet. They are rivaled only by the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, which seems to have never moved. Never mind the fact that the Wall Street Journal headquarters was directly across the street from the Twin Towers. Wall Street Journal staffers saw people making that horrible decision to jump to their death rather than being incinerated alive. And yet, for all intents and purposes, the Wall Street Journal still stands by the Independence Holiday Weekend editorial fashioned by, I believe his name was Robert Bartley, who proposed this: there should be a 5-word amendment to the United States Constitution. There shall be open borders. And the Journal, again, like the Chamber of Commerce, cheap labor. Hey, it's the free market. No, it's not the free market. It's market manipulation. When you bring in people illegally and you depress wages and you say, hey, Uncle Sam will cover their benefits, but I will say I'm compassionate by giving people who want to work a chance. You promote the lawlessness that brought about these horrible attacks in the first place. This brings us to observation number 3. Because I've just what I've pointed out, observations 1 and 2, the angle on this whole story from Channel 4 and the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Let me point out, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce is separate from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. No known connections, but I would not be surprised, based on what we're hearing, if they don't basically share the outlook of, hey, forget immigration law, let people come on in. Oh, yeah, we'll say, because just to say this, we must secure the border. So this is where we are right now. We're smack dab in the middle of the interview from Channel 4 of Yuri Kunza of the Nashville chapter of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And remember, now news is all about competing narratives. Now, if I'm seeing this absolutely wrong, I would love to hear from you. 615-737-9986, 615-737-WWTN. We'll pick up with more from Yuri Kunza and more of Channel 4's coverage of this story. News or narrative, you decide. It's JD Hayworth. It's 9:20 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
A first over-the-counter birth control pill, and Congress getting a Secret Service briefing on cocaine in the White House. Hear more at 9:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Ken will have those stories for you in less than 4 minutes if we observe all the guidelines on what we call in the biz the format clock. 615-737-9986, 615-737-WWTN. Now again, as we are using the Channel 4 story from a recent newscast, really, not to beat up Channel 4, not to beat up the head of the Nashville chapter of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, but to illustrate how news has been replaced by narrative. And the narrative is, and first of all, nobody disputes that the horrific crime is indeed horrific. To have kids sexually molested and raped by a figure in whom they place their trust, as is alleged against we'll just call him the Franklin soccer coach. Nobody makes light of that. However, you have to understand what is at play here, what becomes the byproduct. Yuri Kunza, the president and CEO of the Nashville chapter of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, was Channel 4's go-to guy. And it just comes down to this. You get an appeal, and the words, there's no mention of migrant or being here illegal, but I tell you, listen to Cut 4 and see if it doesn't translate as, hey, if you've come here illegally, we got to look past your minor crime for your help with this greater crime. Cut 4.
We need to think that every member of our community, no matter where they came from, can be an ally in fighting crime.
An ally in fighting crime, just not an ally in fighting the crime of violating immigration law. So the big info to come out of the Channel 4 story is that a bilingual telephone line has been established and immigration lawyers will be available pro bono, that means for free, to make sure if you happen to be in this country illegally, you will not pay the price for breaking and entering the United States. Your initial crime, well, given the lack of enforcement, you can argue that for a long time it's been not even a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's been a never be charged with a crime or walk away when they give you a notice to appear. Here's the sad situation, the whiplash, the schizophrenia of public policy now concerning immigration law. If these laws had been enforced in the first place, the alleged perpetrator of these horrible crimes would have never walked the streets of Franklin, Tennessee, much less coached kids in soccer. There's more on this that you and I need to talk about, and we will do so in mere moments. Right now, it's 9:30. It's JD Hayworth on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
"9:30 on the dot this Thursday morning. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories, and even though it is a low-level risk for severe showers and thunderstorms, we still have to pay attention to it. I'll tell you about it in 2 minutes with the full forecast. Breaking news, the federal government approving the first over-the-counter birth control pill, Perrigo's once-a-day O-pill. Won't start shipping until early next year, but there will be no age restrictions on sales. Lawmakers in Washington gathering this morning for a planned Secret Service briefing on last week's discovery of cocaine inside the White House near the West Wing last week. And Hollywood production could shut down as soon as today after a deadline to reach a deal between the Screen Actors Guild and producers has passed. Actors want assurances AI won't take their jobs and money. Writers want the same thing. They're still on strike with no end in sight after more than 70 days. That's the latest news. Weather is next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Hi, I'm Paul Winkler. There was a recent study by JD Power looking at how happy investors were with their advisors, and it wasn't pretty. What they found was only 11% of the respondents said that they were getting comprehensive financial planning, that the fees were clear, and that they felt that the advisor was acting in their best interest. Not a good picture, 11%. Now, one of the things that we do is we do comprehensive planning. We fit all of those bills, number one. But one of the things I want to talk about is in the financial planning process, what I think it ought to look like and what is available that people aren't getting. And one of the things is called probability analysis. So in essence, this is what we're talking about. We're trying to accumulate money for retirement. Put money aside, hoping that we'll have enough so that we can have income throughout retirement. And what we find is that people have Social Security, they have pensions in their financial plan, and they also have investments. Now, with their investments, we want to do something very specific that it really requires quite an academic background to do this. And this is where we look at the cost of capital of the various things that you own in your investment portfolio. It sounds scary, it sounds really detailed, but here's the idea. Is if we look at various asset classes like large stocks and small stocks and large value and bonds and so on and so forth, we know the expected return or the cost that these entities have to pay to use your money. So we can come up with an expected return of the portfolio. We can also come up with what's called standard deviation, or how much that portfolio return may deviate from the expected return. Now that's a whole other video, but what I want to do is show you how we use this. If I look at a financial plan and I say, well, you got this area, this area, this area, what I can do is I can say, well, based on when you want to retire, this is how much income you can take, and here's the likelihood of being able to have this income survive throughout your entire life. And the way it works is this. If I take a portfolio and say, there's the expected return, I can look at history and say, well, the way your portfolio is designed, how might your one-year returns vary from the expected return, the long-term expected return? Well, what we know from academic research is that portfolios well designed and properly managed in ways that I can't get into right now, it's too complicated, portfolios actually close in an expected return, but we don't know what the short-term returns are going to be. So what we do is we project out and say, well, what if the return that happened in 1936 is followed by the return that happened in 1975, which is followed by the return in 1995, or what if it's reversed? What if they happen in different orders? And we can do 1,000 iterations, different variations on when those and how those returns may come in. And what that does is, because we can't predict the future, what return is going to follow the other, we can figure out, is it likely that we are going to be able to take the income that we need throughout retirement from this portfolio? And if not, how can we rearrange the furniture or the portfolio to give us a higher likelihood of success? And we look at life expectancies, we look at a lot of different things, but this is what is available to people that they're not getting from the financial planning community. If you want to know more, go to paulwinkler.com, set up a free 15-minute phone call, paulwinkler.com, and come in and find out more about what we do.
23 minutes in front of 10 Central Daylight Time. Next hour. If you think the FBI now stands for Federal Biden Insurance, yesterday's hearing before the House Judiciary Committee would do nothing to dissuade you from having that impression. Christopher Wray does his star turn, and the FBI director is contemptuous of constitutional oversight that is located in the legislative branch. We will we'll have a chance to examine his kind of malignant elitism and unconstitutional conduct, in my opinion, but that comes next hour. Then, hour 3. Gosh, I guess you and I first got together here at Super Talk 99.7 WTN a couple of years ago when they were nice enough to let me join you, and I've been like that pesky, cantankerous uncle who shows up at Thanksgiving or Independence Day. Well, let me tell you what's going on here. At any rate, I pointed out then, 2 years ago, we had the outrageous testimony and the brown-nosing of the left from Mark Silly Milley, who, as a general in the United States Army, has been serving as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Well, Joe Biden's got another choice. Silly Milley is going to go off and count his rather considerable military pension in some other point. I'm sure he'll find a lovely leftist enclave to call home. But next up, it's General C.Q. Brown. And the Senate, with some guts-up folks, and then some folks who are, well, just a little bit cowardly when it comes to really standing up when there are concerns. General C.Q. Brown, despite all the warning signs, apparently is going to follow Mark Silly Milley. Find out why, in my mind, General Brown, the CQ, could stand for Commander, let's go forth, find a commander to lead us to Cuba. No, the CQ. In hour 3, you will find out why General Brown's nickname should be Commander Quota. That is coming up. We continue. It's a dual effort here to take a look at how local TV news works in the year 2023. And it's really not that different a formula from even back in the Ron Burgundy days. I'm kind of a big deal. It's the same kind of thing. In fact, the consultants come in, or used to back in the day. Now, maybe times have gotten tough, but I'm imagining that local research is still done, or somehow the consultants will have a national poll, and it's kind of what happens in politics. What are people talking about? What are people's concerns? How do we position ourselves as active in the community while at the same time chronicle the day's headlines? Or the worst question, and Millennial Mac, since you probably weren't on the planet when I was kind of a big deal in the local television news wars before going on to Congress, where in my mind I became even a bigger deal in my twisted, tortured way of looking at things. But I actually found out this was back when it was not bad to have an audience that included those in the upper demographics. Let's say the demographic just over 60. But the way the questions, the telephone surveys would be asked of older viewers, gee, if there's anybody you see on local TV at night, of those you see, who would you like most to attend your memorial service? I am not kidding you. That was the question asked. Who do you consider on local television enough of a friend that you would be honored if they showed up at your funeral? A true story, man. I heard it straight from the consultants. Now, just for what it's worth, we never asked those questions politically. Because the bottom line was, if you didn't get the most votes, it was your political funeral. It didn't make any difference about trying to get all the touchy-feely stuff, but that's what's happened before in local television news. Now, let me hasten to add, I am not suggesting that those kind of questions have been asked, at least not recently, by any of the local TV news operations in the Music City. But we've been dissecting the most recent coverage of, well, the most recent, no. There's a delay of, 18 to 36 hours, I guess, of Channel 4's coverage of the Franklin soccer coach accused of these horrible cases of child molestation. And, well, the news to report as of 36 hours ago that still is an important subject to talk about is his immigration status. And he was one of those guys. Don't call him a migrant. That's not accurate. An illegal alien. So he was. Sorry, this woke age, we're supposed to use euphemisms. You might say, well, JD, you're not talking about the exact acts. You're talking about child molestation. You're cleaning that up. Why don't you cut those who come illegally here a break? Well, when you fudge words and you change the meanings, for example, the other day, one of the networks, if you've seen Joe Biden abroad, first to the UK and then to the NATO summit, CBS, on its web service, cbsnews.com, had a headline to the effect, grandfatherly appeal of Joe Biden may help him at the NATO summit. Now, somebody who writes a headline like that is so blindingly partisan. I mean, 2 days before, there's all the furor about Navy Joan Roberts, the granddaughter of the Bidens via their son Hunter, and even Maureen Dowd at the New York Times was taking the Bidens to task. But boy, we like Joe so much, his grandfatherly appeal will help him at NATO. It's the narrative that is being presented. And so again, Yuri Kunza of the Nashville chapter of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, he's working for Enterprise Business, but and the other thing is, let me hasten, do not accept the myth of the monolith. Don't believe for a single nanosecond if someone has a Hispanic last name, they are absolutely 100% in favor of open borders and amnesty. That's just not the case. And you can take a look at the districts now on the border, districts that were for a century Democrat, now flipping to Republicans who have said enough is enough about people coming here illegally. But with the crime committed by an illegal alien who's been here, 20 years, Yuri Kunza comes on, and the new imperative is, hey, if you've come here illegal, you can still help fight the horrible crime that occurred. Take a listen again to cut 4.
We need to think that every member of our community, no matter where they came from, can be an ally in fighting crime.
All right. And as I pointed out earlier, sure, an ally in fighting crime, just not an ally in fighting the crime of violating immigration law. Yuri Kunza wraps up his interview, again, assiduously avoiding any specific mention of parents or kids being here illegally. Cut 5.
How is that going to impact the individual, be that a child or a family member or a parent, and their social circle?
And their social circle. No mention of immigration status, even though that's why they're going to have the bilingual line, and that's why they're going to have immigration attorneys to help folks if they come forward, if God forbid the United States actually wants to enforce immigration law. So this has been the line of thinking for the better part of 4 decades, with the 4-year exception of Donald John Trump in the White House. What you are supposed to believe, there's nothing that can be done about the people who come here illegally. Don't you dare suggest that their unlawful status may have played a part in the suspect's calculations for committing his alleged crimes. In other words, the families are going to shut up. But the real political goal in the wake of this horrid crime, there's still a political goal that is desired by the open borders crowd. The left wants cheap votes, and some guys who claim they're conservative want cheap labor. And what they're saying is, well, you're not going to send anybody home. Why that would be cruel. You're not going to enforce immigration law. Our solution of being adults, we're going to call ourselves adults. We'll just grant these people amnesty. That way they'll be citizens. They'll please the left by voting. And guess what? Joe Sixpack and his wife Norma, well, your tax dollars are going to go to pay for all the Social Security and everything else that goes along with it. When we come back, the inside story from the Bush-Cheney team in 2004 trying to convince a couple of reticent representatives. That would be yours truly and the lady who's now your senior senator from Tennessee. That is coming up. Right now, it's 10 in front of 10. It's JD Hayworth, Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Birth control pill over the counter. Another cell phone rape case is blowing up in Middle Tennessee. And in our nation's capital, the Secret Service says there's nothing to see here, folks. Talking about that White House cocaine. Got an update for you coming up at 10 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Surprise. Yeah, nothing to see. Move along. Nothing to see here.
Move along now, move along.
Gee. Mercy, well, I can't really be surprised about that. And in that vein, in our next hour, FBI, federal Biden insurance, based on the arrogant, contemptuous testimony and responses of the FBI director, Christopher Wray, in front of the House Judiciary Committee. All of that is next hour. But now, stick with me as I take you behind the scenes to a time where, well, we kind of realize that, boy, it's crazy to try and fight a war, and not especially when you've had invaders come into the country, in that case, terrorists from the Middle East. What's going along the vast expanse of the southern border? First precept of any military situation: seal the borders and the ports of entry. We've never done that in the wake of 9/11. And a lot of us would try to make the case to Bush and Cheney in the case of then Congressman. She doesn't like the term Congresswoman. When she was a member of the House, I'll just say Representative Marsha Blackburn. And yours truly, when I was serving from Arizona, one day Dick Cheney comes over as vice president. And it's to give us that talk from the Bush-Cheney team about, hey, we really got to find a solution, and amnesty's the way to go. And Marcia brings it up, and I follow, and we're politely raising HE double hockey sticks. And Dick Cheney in that offhand way, well, presumably there are businesses in your district who are looking for employees. Yeah, but Mr. Vice President, the bottom line is you don't want to depress wages and set up a permanent lower class. One other thing along those lines, at the White House, and the White House photographer got the picture, and since I'm bigger than George W., I guess I was doing the Lyndon to it. He was sending Colin Powell down to Mexico City to work on what was called a Social Security Totalization Agreement. I was saying, Mr. President, as a courtesy, don't even think about it. If you introduce a Social Security equalization agreement with Mexico, I will have legislation that I will put on the floor in the form of a discharge petition, and we will stop it. You and I are just getting started. Hour two's ahead. It's JD Hayworth on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Ten o'clock on the dot this Thursday morning. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. Got a crash in the way. Going to be Harding Place at Recovery Road here in Nashville. And then in Robertson County, left lane is blocked 24 eastbound approaching Maxey Road. That is a 42-minute delay. Full forecast in 2 minutes. Well, a birth control pill can now be sold without a prescription or age restrictions.
For the first time, federal regulators have allowed a hormonal birth control pill, Opil, to be sold over the counter. Opil has been on the market for 50 years, but will now be available to consumers off the shelf. An FDA advisory panel concluded the drug is safe for most patients. It's a progestin-only pill that doctors said poses fewer medical risks than pills that rely on estrogen.
That's Aaron Katersky reporting. Right now in Middle Tennessee, Murfreesboro police say they're trying to identify several women they say were raped while they were unconscious or asleep. Detectives say they found many videos and photos on a suspected rapist's cell phone. 38-year-old Emmanuel Webb is already in jail for a rape charge last year, but detectives say this new evidence on his phone indicates there are victims who may not even know they're victims because they were unconscious or asleep when it happened. And right now in our nation's capital, Tennessee, U.S. Congressman Tim Burchett telling Fox News Digital The Secret Service told lawmakers this morning they will wrap up the cocaine in the White House investigation tomorrow without knowing how it got there or naming a suspect. The Secret Service was giving members of Congress a briefing this morning.
Sources tell us the cocaine was found inside a small bag in a cubby near the entrance of the West Wing. Now, this is typically an area where visitors are told to leave their cell phones and electronics before continuing on with those invitation-only tours. The White House was briefly evacuated. The president and his family were away at Camp David. And other than that, the White House has said very little about all of this. Republicans are making it clear they are not satisfied. We'll be pushing for more answers.
That is Rachel Scott reporting, and the latest news. Weather is next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
And at 5 minutes past 10, it's time for our second hour. From the guest host who in his own, who's a legend in his own mind and considers his time with you, well, time well spent, and really a program that is second to none. Yes, recovering Congressman JD Hayworth of Arizona. Some of you have reached out on social media, some of you listening outside the coverage area of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. As a matter of fact, listening on streaming audio, 997WTN.com is a New Jerseyan turned North Carolinian, and that would be Brother Matt. Matt sent a little note. And look, it's not that I'm a triskaidekaphobe. This is July 13th. I've not brought it up today, but Matt reminds me that that yesterday, July 12th, I had a birthday. And here, Matt really helps a guy feel better. I need to point out that today is the first full day of your 66th year, JD. My grandfather always put himself and anyone else a year older than they were because of that fact. Makes you feel old. Well, Matt, thank you, I think. The fact is that as we continue to grow up, I was never a big fan of Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the United States, upon the departure of Fred Vinson. Apparently, Dwight Eisenhower had made a deal at the 52 convention to get California delivered to Eisenhower. There was kind of, hey, if there's a Supreme Court vacancy, Earl Warren, then the governor of California, who had been the running mate of Governor Thomas Dewey of New York in 1948, the intimation was, hey, something comes open, Earl, boom, you're going to go to the Supreme Court. Well, the job that came open was the Chief Justiceship. And Ike was not too happy about it. He called up Dewey, and Dewey, who'd been an active supporter of Ike, and advised, well, look, hey, Mr. President, deal's a deal. And Earl Warren, the Warren Court, did more to protect the rights of the accused, was more activist in that regard than understanding also there needs to be a balance for victims' rights. And the story was Richard Norton Smith, Tom Dewey's biographer, said that Ike said to Dewey, Governor, I just want to call this thing off and appoint you to the court. And Dewey says, nope, deal's a deal. So Earl Warren, who unfortunately Tom Dewey referred to in private, again, a different time, according to biographer Richard Norton Smith, Tom Dewey called his running mate, Earl Warren, quote, the big dumb Swede. Well, I'm not here to malign Earl Warren, though I have some disagreements with his approach to jurisprudence. But Earl Warren is credited with this observation. It's a quotable quote. Don't spurn old age, embrace it. After all, a whole lot of people never even got the chance to grow older. It's a very good point. It's just that, well, I like the description, as you might expect, if you are a denizen of the desert, you wear a lot of hats, protective clothing, sunscreen, and you still end up over the dermatologist. But my bride, the lovely Miss Mary, had a dermatologist who never spoke of growing older. She just said, well, you're growing up. And okay, that's fine. What I find is that, there's not a real change. I mean, starting in my 40s, you'd wake up and you'd feel like you'd gone through 2-a-days for football a little bit. Then you get up and get going. That same, maybe it's a little more pronounced as you grow up, but man, not ready for the scrap heap. So anyway, we continue onward. How about that news that Ken Weaver had coming from Congressman Burchett over in eastern Tennessee? The Secret Service shows up, and they're remarkably incurious about what's going on, about the cocaine. The investigation's over. Here's where we found it. End of story. So, Brother Mac, it would appear to me, and maybe your study of history, you may have come across the Praetorian Guard. I don't know if you've encountered the Praetorian Guard, important to the emperors once Rome transitioned from a republic to an empire. And whomever sat in the chair with the garland often didn't get there through typical electioneering, a whole lot of intrigue, a whole lot of political and physical violence, and a whole lot of abuse. And so the Romans had their I guess we called it a progenitor of today's Secret Service, the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard there to carry out the wishes of the emperor and to offer not only security, but to keep information secure about the various indiscretions. Well, we first saw this, or it was brought to light, given the, in retrospect, not so curious, the conduct we should have expected years ago from one William Jefferson Clinton and his escapades with interns and his other invitations for frolicking with females who didn't happen to be his wife. But now, with today's announcement, the Secret Service is saying, well, we got to keep some things secret. There's no more investigation of the cocaine at the White House. And of course, the real suspicion is, well, old Hunter Biden's got that sweetheart plea deal. If he's back abusing drugs, there goes the plea deal, which should be thrown out anyway. So the Secret Service is emphasizing the secret instead of the service. Surprise, surprise. Just the latest example of security forces and alleged law enforcement organizations saying we serve the elite and HE double hockey sticks with accountability to those who follow and to those who happen to have a constitutional role which commands them in part to exercise oversight of different branches of government and different federal agencies. Here's a variation on the theme yesterday in a hearing held by the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida is questioning the FBI director, Christopher Wray. Now understand, Chris Wray is not as well. He's getting, when you check out his facial tics and the way he sits, he's just a shade, and it's tough to really quantify this. It's my perception that he at least tries to act as if he has a little more humility than his predecessor, the 6'8" ethical pygmy, James Comey, who was just insufferable, and especially when he would go testify in front of the Senate. Oh, Director Comey, you're so smart. Ooh, what a sharp legal mind. In my opinion, what's that joke about? So how tall are you, Comey? 6'8"? I didn't know they stacked sewage that high. But take a listen to Matt Gaetz, and he just starts with the transcript of the text that the whistleblower made public. It is Hunter Biden browbeating, threatening the Chinese official, a big wig in the Communist Party, and the Chinese have an approach. It's called the princeling strategy. Get to the kids of prominent Americans and they will end up doing our bidding, because the kid will get daddy and they'll get wrapped up, and pretty soon, for all intents and purposes, they're on our payroll. So I want you to listen to the exchange. It's Matt Gaetz, not making this up. He's reading the transcript that the whistleblowers provided, cut 6.
I'm sitting here with my father. I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows, and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction. I am sitting here waiting for the call with my father. Sounds like a shakedown, doesn't it, Director?
I'm not going to get into commenting on that.
You seem deeply uncurious about it, don't you? Almost suspiciously uncurious. Are you protecting the Bidens?
Absolutely not. The FBI
Well, you
does
won't
not
answer
and
the
has
question.
no
Hold on.
interest in
You won't answer the
protecting
question
anyone
about whether or not
politically.
that's a shakedown, and everybody knows why you won't answer it. Because to the millions of people who will see this, they know it is. And your inability to acknowledge that is deeply revealing.
Yeah, I mean, you see, now you might say, and if you're an attorney listening, you have my apologies and condolences. And there is a clear difference between what's legally correct and what's morally correct. Sad to say, it exists all the time. And you could argue that Christopher Wray, as FBI director, is compelled not to comment on possible criminal cases. But there are a million things Chris Wray could have said, like, Congressman, although I am constrained from making a direct comment, I assure you that that investigations continue, or something like that. But he doesn't even go there. Chris Wray, I'm not going to comment on this. And then, and then you see Gates hit pay dirt. When he says, come on, people see this. They see it for what it is, a shakedown. And then I don't mean to go all amateur grammarian on Matt Gaetz. I believe the word is incurious rather than uncurious, but we understand what he means. It's the same deal with the Secret Service. And now what we're just hearing about, cocaine investigation wraps up tomorrow. As Ken put it, nothing to see here. Move along, move along. And the reason is, if you are willing to exercise power and say and disregard the constitutional authority of another branch of government and apparently stay cool with certain folks in your leadership leaking other stories about maybe a former president to the New York Times, or take your pick of the alphabet networks or certain leftist newspapers. In addition to the New York Times, the Washington Post comes to mind. If you're cool with that, but going to sit there and say, no, I don't care to comment, and then to get really hot. I had a great press secretary, a gifted sports writer and editor who made the move into politics in Kentucky. The late, great Larry Van Hoos. I nicknamed him the Kentucky Polecat. And some of the folks who worked for Larry went on to write for Sports Illustrated back when Sports Illustrated wasn't all woke, and actually contributed greatly to the pursuit of sports journalism. But the Kentucky Polecat, from being way back in the holler by Hyder, Kentucky, said, Congressman, it's real simple. A hit dog hollers. And when you heard Christopher Wray, when Matt Gaetz lowers the boom about, so you guys are covering for the Bidens. That wasn't righteous indignation, in my opinion. In the vernacular of the Kentucky Polecat, that hit dog was hollering. 20 minutes past 10, JD Hayworth, Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Over-the-counter birth control pill. The Secret Service wrapping up the cocaine in the White House investigation. We'll tell you what's got Republicans talking. And the federal government's opening an investigation into the maker of ChatGPT. Details at 10:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
And that is exactly, 5 minutes away. Time at that tone that I supplied in an effort to be fiscally responsible. Just forget artificial intelligence. There was just a human sound effect right there. Number to call is 615-737-9986 or 615-737-WWTN. If you're able to take the call letters and spell it out, it gets you to 9986. On that great number to call, Millennial Mac. You might be interested in knowing I passed along, I received a communication via internet from one of our listeners outside of Middle Tennessee, listening to streaming audio at 997WTN.com.
Yes.
And he didn't mean anything by it. But, you know, as one continues to grow up, and especially after achieving the milestone I did yesterday on July 12th, he talked about how his granddad added a year, so you use the year older, and then it makes you feel old. But he began, this is where it comes in for you, brother. I guess maybe he was offering the contrast between younger and more mature folks, and maybe it's just highlighting that this is the same guy, Matt, who made the suggestion that we use the nickname Millennial Mac for you. He begins with, I like the fact that you are still using Millennial Mac. Well, I hope you like it too, Millennial Mac. And if you don't, what the heck? The only the consolation is it is short-lived. Because I don't know when I come back, I will, I guess, be invited back on some irregular schedule as programming needs require it. But this has been a good time and a good perspective. And so as we finish up this Thursday, we're trying to do so with incisive analysis and commentary and a few things that have gone on. But I got to tell you, I served on the Hill, and there was a Democrat administration for my first, 2 terms there? I guess 3. Yeah, because they're 2-year terms. And anyway, or the transition from one president to another. But man, I have never seen this kind of arrogance where the FBI just hides behind, it's an investigation, we can't talk about that. Or worse, we're just not going to talk about that, and we're not going to send the people you want to talk to. Take a listen to Cut 7.
Director, what's the difference between a traditional Catholic and a radical traditional Catholic?
I'm not an expert on the Catholic orders.
Well, your FBI wrote a memo talking about radical traditional Catholics. I'm just wondering if you could define it for us.
Well, what I can tell you is you're referring to the Richmond product, which was a single product by a single field office, which as soon as I found out about it, I was aghast and ordered it withdrawn and removed from FBI systems.
You were aghast, then why won't you let us talk to the people who put it together?
We are working on finishing an internal review into what happened
We have to wait. We, the Congress, and the American people have to wait until you do an internal review. It's not a criminal investigation going on here. An internal review before we can talk to the people who wrote this?
That is Chairman Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, but a national champion collegiate wrestler during his days at Wisconsin, trying to wrestle some of the information out of Chris Wray. And it's the same thing. We're not going to tell you. We're doing our own probe. And forgive me, but I've got, I'm kind of seeing that so-called probe of the agents involved in the Richmond project that called Roman Catholics who were pro-life potential terrorists, I'm kind of thinking those guys should be subpoenaed and should be on Capitol Hill. And I'm kind of thinking that Director Wray should end up in the brig. Oh, there is one in the House. I'll tell you more about that in mere moments as we continue to review the testimony of the, yet again, another arrogant FBI director. It's JD Hayworth, Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
10:30 on the dot this Thursday morning. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. A level 1 out of 5 risk for severe weather today. Low, but we still have to keep an eye on things. Full forecast in 2 minutes. The FDA has approved an over-the-counter birth control pill today. This means that it can be sold without a prescription, no age limitations. The company's going to start shipping it out after the first of the year. The Secret Service says it's going to wrap up its investigation of cocaine in the White House tomorrow without naming a suspect. Congressman Tim Burchett of Knoxville calls it a cover-up.
It's the most secure building in the entire world. You can't go in there. They have facial identification. You got to give your social security number. Nobody, even the press, nobody goes in there without them knowing. This is a bad look on the Secret Service and a horrible look on this White House.
Federal Trade Commission opening an investigation into OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, over whether the chatbot has harmed consumers. That's the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Hi, I'm Paul Winkler. There was a recent study by JD Power looking at how happy investors were with their advisors, and it wasn't pretty. What they found was only 11% of the respondents said that they were getting comprehensive financial planning, that the fees were clear, and that they felt that the advisor was acting in their best interest. Not a good picture, 11%. Now, one of the things that we do is we do comprehensive planning. We fit all of those bills, number one. But one of the things I want to talk about is in the financial planning process, what I think it ought to look like and what is available that people aren't getting. And one of the things is called probability analysis. So in essence, this is what we're talking about. We're trying to accumulate money for retirement. Put money aside, hoping that we'll have enough so that we can have income throughout retirement. And what we find is that people have Social Security, they have pensions in their financial plan, and they also have investments. Now, with their investments, we want to do something very specific that it really requires quite an academic background to do this. And this is where we look at the cost of capital of the various things that you own in your investment portfolio. It sounds scary, it sounds really detailed, but here's the idea. Is if we look at various asset classes like large stocks and small stocks and large value and bonds and so on and so forth, we know the expected return or the cost that these entities have to pay to use your money. So we can come up with an expected return of the portfolio. We can also come up with what's called standard deviation, or how much that portfolio return may deviate from the expected return. Now that's a whole other video, but what I want to do is show you how we use this. If I look at a financial plan and I say, well, you got this area, this area, this area, what I can do is I can say, well, based on when you want to retire, this is how much income you can take, and here's the likelihood of being able to have this income survive throughout your entire life. And the way it works is this. If I take a portfolio and I say, there's the expected return, I can look at history and say, well, the way your portfolio is designed, how might your one-year returns vary from the expected return, the long-term expected return? Well, what we know from academic research is that portfolios well designed and properly managed in ways that I can't get into right now, it's too complicated, portfolios actually close in an expected return, but we don't know what the short-term returns are going to be. So what we do is we project out and say, well, what if the return that happened in 1936 is followed by the return that happened in 1975, which is followed by the return in 1995, or what if it's reversed? What if they happen in different orders? And we can do 1,000 iterations, different variations on when those and how those returns may come in. And what that does is, because we can't predict the future, what return's going to follow the other, we can figure out Is it likely that we are going to be able to take the income that we need throughout retirement from this portfolio? And if not, how can we rearrange the furniture or the portfolio to give us a higher likelihood of success? And we look at life expectancies, we look at a lot of different things, but this is what is available to people that they're not getting from the financial planning community. If you want to know more, go to paulwinkler.com, set up a free 15-minute phone call, paulwinkler.com, and come in and find out more about what we do.
Mm-hmm. Six 615-737-9986. 615-737-WWTN, the number to call. If you care to reach out via social media, LinkedIn.com. For now is the social media I'm using. Just go to the little search icon, you know, the thing that looks like a magnifying glass. Type J period, D period, as in John David, J period, D period, Hayworth, Hayworth. And then we'll get linked, and then you can give me the lowdown if you're a little uncomfortable with calling, or you need the candor and the cover of the keyboard. That's cool. I understand it. Boy, it's always interesting, the less than candid responses we get from, well, pick the FBI director. The 6'8" ethical pygmy was bad enough, Jim Comey, but now there's Chris Wray. And of course, there is a difference between being contemptuous and actually being held in contempt of Congress. If you don't show up, if you refuse a subpoena, you can be found in contempt of Congress. Now, the fact that Republicans control the House, and since any of that action would have to take place within the District of Columbia, and you will find no more Democrat sympathetic political jurisdiction than the District of Columbia, you just can't expect too much from the U.S. attorney there, and certainly a jury. You can't expect to field a jury of one's peers if you're the Republican Congress. So what happens is, rather than criminal charges, usually when a contempt measure is brought up by a Republican Congress in the Democrat District of Columbia, they go the civil route, not the criminal route, because they realize they wouldn't get anywhere with it. However, if and when anything ever came to jurisdiction, there is a brig, there is a holding cell in the Capitol. As I recall, it was the House Sergeant at Arms, Wilson Livengood, who told me, he said, "Hey, Congressman, yeah, you know, downstairs on the first floor, there's the old Supreme Court chamber. You go one floor down from that in the basement, and there's an old-time cell with bars, the whole 9 yards." Well, I must confess I never saw it, so I'm taking his word for it. But Christopher Wray is a clever guy. Remember, somebody decided to do a little profile of Chris Wray's experience as an attorney. He was a high-priced, high-powered Washington attorney hauling in $9 million a year. And so when he is contemptuous, when you make that money, yes, he may now be, quote, in federal service. But he's stashed some money, and money changes people. And what Chris Wray believes is there's no guy smarter. He's got the Jim Comey disease of the what he believes to be intellectually arrogant, the fact that, hey, I know more than you know, and you're not going to find out. So what's interesting, one of the home folks for this Arizonan, yours truly, a successor in the Congress for a portion of one of my old districts, Andy Biggs, Congressman Andy Biggs of Mesa, Arizona, on the Judiciary Committee. Oh, by the way, a little trivia on Andy Biggs. Remember those commercials for the Publishers Clearinghouse giveaway? Andy Biggs and his family actually won the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes and all the dough that went with it. Now, I've never asked Andy if he took the big lump sum or whatever, but the money didn't spoil Andy. It empowered him for education and for his kids' education and for service in the United States Congress. Oh, one other note on the Republican side, another member of Congress won a smaller lottery payout. Well, I know, okay, Andy won a sweepstakes. But the current Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, he won some dough from the California lottery, and the story on his bio is he took it and he plowed it into the sandwich shop he opened. After years in service of Congressman Bill Thomas, who was one of the Ways and Means chairmen with whom I served, K-Mac took that dough not to make Big Macs. He didn't have a McDonald's franchise, but he had a sandwich shop, and that's when Kevin McCarthy talks about free enterprise and being a small business owner, that's where the capital came from, winning the lottery. Now, after that little bit of congressional errata, some might call it trivia, let's set the scene. Andy Biggs, my Arizona friend, is asking the FBI director, Chris Wray, about the agency's presence in the crowd that gathered at the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. Now, I'm not going to say Chris Wray doesn't read the Bible, but maybe he didn't pay attention to that passage, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Take a listen to cut 8.
Please don't distract here, because we're focusing on those who were there in an undercover capacity on January 6th. How many were there?
Again, I'm not sure that I can give you that number as I sit here. I'm not sure there were undercover agents on scene.
I find that kind of a remarkable statement, Director. At this point, you don't know whether there were undercover federal agents, FBI agents, in the crowd or in the Capitol on January 6th.
I say that because I want to be very careful. There have been a number of court filings related to some of these topics, and I want to make sure that I stick within what's in.
I understand that, but I thought I heard you say you didn't know whether there were FBI agents or informants or human sources in the Capitol or in the vicinity on January 6th. Did I misunderstand you? I thought that's what you said.
Well, I referred very specifically to undercover agents.
Oh, but this is the thing. The way in which Chris Wray rolls that out. And look, you got to have some admiration for Andy Biggs, because in talking to this high-priced attorney, it's like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. This guy is clever. But the transcript, when Chris Wray says he doesn't know of any personnel or, quote, undercover agents, here's something just to keep in mind. Usually at every major gathering in Washington, D.C., close to the White House, close to the Congress, and certainly now, given the way the Supreme Court has been weaponized, at the Supreme Court, as a matter of regular order, the FBI has been known to send security personnel in, not flashing badges and not wearing the big windbreakers that say FBI on the back. So Biggs says, despite this guy thinking he's being clever, despite him saying that he wants to be very careful here with what he says, Andy Biggs is saying right here, this guy is lying because he is not admitting what is commonly known, that there are personnel. Oh, there are none that I know of. Really? None that you know of, Director Ray? And this it could lead to a perjury charge, but again, Chris Wray is one slick lawyer, and again, his status, you may recall, I think it was last summer, he was over on the Senate side, and he only had a brief time in his schedule. Chuck Grassley and others had a lot of questions on the Senate side for Christopher Wray, but he had a very finite time. I think he came and spent 90 minutes before the committee, and then he just had to leave. Found out later it was for summer vacation. A federal jet, an FBI jet, was taking him up to some lake house, as I recall, in the Adirondack Mountains. And so this guy has got something fundamentally wrong. He does not believe he is a servant of the people. He believes he is an elite attorney and administrator, and when congressmen ask legitimate questions, he is going to play word games. And in the vernacular of the graffiti artist, that just S-U-X. Now, one other thing to keep in mind. There's just been a decision. It's called the Missouri decision. The Missouri decision made possible by the newest Republican senator from Missouri. You're going to hear from him next hour, Senator Eric Schmitt. Until the 2022 election, Eric Schmitt was the Attorney General of the state of Missouri. And if memory serves, he brought this case in conjunction with the state of Louisiana. So the state of Missouri, and if memory serves right, the state of Louisiana, may have been Mississippi, may have been a whole bunch of states filing amicus briefs. But basically, it's the case that went in front of the federal district judge last week, and that judge ain't playing around. He issued an injunction saying, no, you are not NOT. If you're with the federal bureaucracy, if you're with the FBI, if you're with any federal agency, you will not be allowed to go in and, quote, advise social media companies. When we come back, you're going to hear the level of obfuscation, the high-priced but lowly principled Christopher Wray utilizes. Oh, yeah, and the thing is, hey, I didn't read the opinion. That's straight ahead, 12 minutes in front of 11. JD Hayworth, Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
New federal approval on birth control in this country. Another rape case involving a cell phone here in Middle Tennessee. The Secret Service says the cocaine in the White House investigation is over. And the Tree of Life synagogue murderer in Pittsburgh is closer to getting the death penalty. Details coming up at 11 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
And that is coming up in a little more than 4 minutes. Thanks very much, Ken. Now, let me get back to the whole deal here. A federal judge and the complicit media, a Trump appointee, has stopped cold any interactions by federal bureaucrats, especially those in law enforcement, and social media companies. My old colleague, Daryl Issa, a guy who didn't win the lottery but was a multimillionaire based, I think, on car alarms, made his way from Cleveland to California. And when I first met Daryl, he was not a member of Congress, but everybody knew he had loot. Hey, how about contributing to the campaign? He decided to come to Congress himself, and he is back there. I think he had a one-term interruption when the district lines were redrawn. But he's back, and he asked Chris Wray about the most recent, what's called the Missouri decision, dealing with the FBI basically ordering social media companies to take certain desired actions desired by the Biden administration. Cut 9.
We don't ask social media companies to censor information or suppress information when it comes to national security. We will call social media companies' attention to that, but at the end of the day, we're very clear that it's up to the social media companies to decide whether to do something about it or not.
The suggestion of the most powerful law enforcement operation is not a suggestion. It is, in fact, effectively an order.
That's absolutely right, Daryl Issa. Yeah, it's not a suggestion. It's an order, and the FBI becomes Biden's errand boys going out with all this hoo-ha. But what about the performance of Christopher Wray yesterday? He enraged millions of Americans. George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley, a registered Democrat, analyzing Wray's obfuscation exercises yesterday on the Fox News channel. Cut 10.
Look, none of us were expecting a Perry Mason moment where Wray would suddenly stand up and say, I did it. But this was really maddening. He had more details when Eric Swalwell asked him about FBI Family Day. He went on length about that. But when you deal with something that was just the subject of a 155-page report, he draws a blank. He repeatedly said that he didn't have knowledge of things that we've all been talking about. He constantly said that things were under investigation, even matters from January 6th, and he can't comment on an ongoing investigation. Literally, he offered nothing today.
All right, let me go to this point and remind my former colleagues of what they do possess: the power of the purse. And maybe you've heard about it. The FBI is tired of the Robert F. Kennedy Justice Department building, and maybe, there's something going on since RFK Jr. wants to run on the Democrat side. At any rate, the FBI wants a new Taj Mahal headquarters larger than the Pentagon. Well, it's real simple. If Christopher Wray offers nothing that illuminates what the heck is going on, the House of Representatives at least should pass legislation revoking any appropriation to build an FBI headquarters bigger than the Pentagon. That's the least they should do. When we come back, silly Mark Milley may be replaced by commander quotas. It's JD Hayworth. Hour 3's ahead from Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
11 o'clock on the dot this Thursday morning. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. We are looking at a level 1 out of 5 risk for severe weather today. Full forecast in 2 minutes. The FDA has approved an over-the-counter birth control pill that can be sold without a prescription with no age limitations. Here's Ann Flaherty.
This is a progestin-only pill. It has fewer risks than those combination pills that include estrogen. But they say that this is going to start popping up in grocery stores and convenience stores. It's going to be everywhere that you can buy, say, ibuprofen or Tylenol.
The pill is called Opal and is made by Perrigo, which says it won't start shipping it out until early next year. Here in Middle Tennessee, another case involving victims being recorded as they're being sexually assaulted while they're unconscious or asleep. Murfreesboro police say they found many videos and images on 38-year-old Emmanuel Webb's cell phone. Webb is already in jail for a 2022 rape charge, but detectives are now trying to identify all of the women they say are on these cell phone images who may not even know what happened to them. Over to our nation's capital. Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett says the Secret Service told lawmakers today they've wrapped up the cocaine in the White House investigation without naming a suspect or determining how it got there.
Another cover-up. You know, it's the most secure building in the entire world. You can't go in there. They have facial identification. You got to give your social security number. Nobody, even the press, nobody goes in there without them knowing.
Well, sources say the cocaine was found inside a small bag in a cubby near the entrance of the West Wing, which is typically an area where visitors are told to leave their cell phones and other electronics before continuing on with the invitation-only tours. And the person convicted of the 2018 murders of 11 worshipers at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh is closer to getting the death penalty. The jury decided today Robert Bowers is eligible for it. The final phase is for the jury to see more evidence and hear more testimony to decide whether Bowers gets lethal injection or life in prison. That's the latest news. Weather is next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Five minutes past 11, heading into our third and final hour together for the time being. Oh, I guess I'm I guess I'm dating myself. Millennial Mac, be ready to say, okay, boomer. At any rate, what came to mind, the theme to the old TV show Candid Camera, where Alan Funt was the guy's name, Alan Funt, and the redoubtable Durwood Kirby, a guy who made his career out of being a sidekick to Gary Moore. At any rate, they would host Candid Camera, and of course there would be hidden cameras catching people in crazy practical joke kind of things. And the lyric would start as follows: when you least expect it, you're elected, which may apply to whatever future schedule I have in the rotation of celebrity guests who get a chance to be behind the microphone here at Super Talk 99.7, and it's good fun to be with you. So thank you for listening, and of course, pardon the pun, there will be a new hand behind the mic next Monday. But I got a chance to work with Brother Chris over Christmas, and he was producing things and working hard with me, and I have every reason to believe that you will enjoy hearing from him, and you will on Monday. Now, when it comes to personnel matters, one way to think about it, especially in terms of politics and public policy, personnel is policy. When you put in place, and we'll just briefly reference the last hour, when you have arrogant, elitist attorneys like Jim Comey, who Donald Trump finally fired. He should have been axed the first day of that Trump took office, but nevertheless, Jim Comey at the FBI, followed by Christopher Wray, and sadly, Mr. Trump will have to assume a bit of culpability because he picked Chris Wray to succeed Jim Comey. But what have we seen from these guys? Nothing but arrogance, elitism, and the notion it's almost like De Niro in The Untouchables. You got nothing, you can't touch me, you got nothing. Now understand the irony of arguably our chief law enforcement officer going before the Congress like a mobster. You got nothing. And in a similar vein, imagine a mission shift for America's military so profound that eliminated as the top the reason for having the armed forces the protection of the United States of America, its people, and its national interests. Take a look at what has happened to our military and how it's gone woke. Now you hear nothing. Or if the talk is there, it is buried amongst all the piffle about sexual identity, transsexuality, gender reference, and oh yeah, the nugget now, the mission. If you check the different branches of the service, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, of course, Marines, the soldiers of the sea, the part of the Navy. By the way, one of the things I wanted to change, and not just simply rename the Navy Department Marine Corps and Navy. But my old friend and part-time political nemesis, as things turned out, and political opponent in 2010, John McCain, I'll have none of that. We're going to keep it Department of the Navy. Although it was interesting, in my campaign, I enlisted the help of R. Lee Ermey. Remember that guy? Played the drill sergeant in Full Metal Jacket. That guy showed up in Yuma, Arizona, home of one of the big Marine Corps air stations. And he was with me on this, let's rename it, MCNAV, Marine Corps Navy. And I got to tell you, based on R. Lee Ermey's character, I was a little, because he's that tough drill sergeant, one of the nicest guys you'd want to meet. And not long thereafter, he was called to that big mail call in the sky. So what has happened in our military, and one of the first occasions you and I got together here on Super Talk 99.7, I was lamenting the fact that General Mark Milley was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs because he gave some testimony before the House Armed Services Committee that was cluing us in on where things were going. That it's not to protect the country, it's diversity. And all the hoo-ha about, quote, diversity is our strength. We'll understand why this is particularly timely. The timing on all of this is somewhat ironic. Breitbart.com reminds us at this hour in its lead story that the Black Lives Matter movement turns 10 today. And BLM, out west, we used to think of that as the Bureau of Land Management because so much of the property out here is federally controlled. Out in Arizona, from whence this program originates today. But I'll give you more on that a little bit later. Let me get to this whole Black Lives Matter thing and the American left. It was brought home with crystal clarity, ironically, during a gathering of leftist bloggers about a decade ago. And Martin O'Malley, who had served a couple of terms as governor of Maryland, decided he was going to run for president. And Martin O'Malley comes out, he's interviewed because the convention of the bloggers takes place in Phoenix, and the leftist crowd really turns it up on Martin O'Malley. And they ask him about, well, these confrontations with police. We better get it straight that Black Lives Matter, a question that's really more of a command. And Martin O'Malley, being a moderate Democrat, says, well, you know what? It is true. Black lives matter. White lives matter. All lives matter. The stink the American left raised at Martin O'Malley had him reversing his position in short order. Well, perhaps I misspoke. I've been persuaded to see the difference, the distinction. Black lives matter most, or words to that effect. Taking off, that's the amazing thing about the left. They're unapologetically extreme. So that was 10 years ago. But more recently, 2020, not the summer of love, the summer of George Floyd. And there's an Air Force, currently he's the chief of staff. A couple of years ago, I believe he was in command of the Air Force in the Pacific. General Charles Q. Brown. And he was compelled to sit down after the George Floyd case, and he makes what could be called, if you want to be very charitable, an emotional video. And yeah, he sits down and issues the disclaimer, these opinions are mine, not the opinions of the Department of Defense. But I want you to hear some of what he said, and then when we come back, I will tell you what precisely is wrong with it. take a listen to a portion of the post-George Floyd video that Air Force General Charles Q. Brown felt compelled to record. This is cut 11.
And thinking about a history of racial issues and my own experiences that didn't always sing of liberty and equality. I'm thinking about living in two worlds, each with their own perspective and views. I'm thinking about my sister and I being the only African Americans in our entire elementary school and trying to fit in. I'm thinking about then going to a high school where roughly half the students were African American and trying to fit in. I'm thinking about my Air Force career, where I was often the only African American in my squadron, or as a senior officer, the only African American in the room.
All right, let me tell you, this may be heartfelt. You may want to indulge this as emotionally raw and honest. And now that we're in the third decade of it's 2023, well, okay, yeah, the third decade of the 21st century, because you got your aughts, and then you got your teens, and now you got your 20s, third decade of the 21st century. It may be courageous to bare one's soul. I listen to this guy, and I got to tell you honestly what I hear. I hear a guy who is wound too tight. Because in this post-George Floyd video, rather than taking pride in his accomplishments in a meritocracy, he is lamenting the distinctions that I presumed heretofore were based on his abilities. What was that Dr. King said? Not the color of your skin, but the content of your character. And closely allied with that, the abilities and the merit you display to move forward. But this guy is telling you that he's upset about the elementary school where he and his little sister were the only African Americans, and then later in, quote, his own Air Force career, when he might be the only African American in a squadron or the only African American in the room. So this guy, who is, boy, Joe Biden can pick it. This guy is scheduled to succeed silly Mark Milley. Old fuss and feathers, and boy, there's an interesting item on Milley, and Millennial Mac, remind me, I will talk about it following news at the bottom of the hour. But it's an interesting note about where Milley and somebody else in the Biden administration happened to go to prep school and where they played football. I'm going to have that. But here's the bottom line. Tell you what, when we come back, what my opinion, the mortal sin that General Charles G. Brown committed with his video is the very reason why the Biden bunch loves him. I'll tell you about that in mere moments. It's 11:19. Recovering Congressman JD Hayworth, Super Talk 99.7.
Breaking news on the 2022 murder of Maya Fuller of Murfreesboro. 3 people are now in custody. The Wilson County Sheriff's Department's giving a press conference. We'll get you the details coming up at 11:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
And that is less than 7 minutes away, 11:23 Central Daylight Time. Number to call, 615-737-9986, 615-737-WWTN. So we heard the 2020 video, a portion of it, from the current Air Force Chief of Staff, Charles Q. Brown, when he made it a couple of years ago in the summer of riots. Post George Floyd, he was, I believe, the commander of the Pacific Air Force. And yes, he sounds emotional, and yes, he's upset about George Floyd, and yes, he issued a disclaimer. Here's the problem. Why do a video? Why would you do that when, as a military officer, you salute and take orders? In fact, the old school, one of the ironies of American politics, it starts with George Washington, a successful commanding general, goes from Washington to U.S. Grant to a guy that you might not include in the group, Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio, elected in the disputed election of 1876. And then, of course, the beloved Dwight David Eisenhower. But I believe it's in one of Stephen Ambrose's 2 volumes on Ike, the old style, when people were speculating, is Ike going to get into the political fray? A lot of military officers consciously chose not to vote back in Ike's day because they had to salute and carry out the orders of the political leaders, the constitutional leaders, and they wanted to show they were outside of politics. Can I tell you what I think was going on with General Brown? In broadcasting, radio or television, you have something called an audition tape. Pardon my cynicism, but C.Q. Brown was thinking he could move forward in the queue, and he was right. Since Antifa and BLM were basically unnamed adjuncts of the Democrat Party in the American left, General Brown was doing his star turn, and he moved from that kind of tightly wound personal memoir, almost suggesting he was a victim because of the merit that at times made him the only African American in the squadron, the only African American in the room in the Air Force, as he said. And then he gets to where he's really going with this. General C.Q. Brown, on that same video, reveals where he's headed, and it is why Joe Biden's bunch says, yeah, this is the guy we need to chair the Joint Chiefs as silly Mark Milley goes and misspends his considerable military pension. This is cut 12.
I'm thinking about how I can make improvements personally, professionally, and institutionally so that all airmen, both today and tomorrow, appreciate the value of diversity and can serve in an environment where they can reach their full potential. I think I don't have all the answers on how to create such an environment, whether here in PACAF or across our Air Force. I'm thinking about, without clear-cut answers, I just want to have the wisdom and knowledge to lead during difficult times like these. I want the wisdom and knowledge to lead, participate in, and listen to necessary conversations on racism, diversity, and inclusion.
There it is. RDI. I got to tell you, what is the other way they talk about it? It's actually, what's the word with the E they use? Anyway, racism, diversity, and inclusion.
Equity?
Equity, that's right. And notice that word, thank you, Millennial Mac, not equality. Equity. Interesting variation there. And really, they should be lined up diversity, inclusion, and equity to form the acronym DIE, DIE. Because if your military is spending its time tearing people apart, and the equity thing's not equality, it's retribution. One of the greatest acts of integration in the United States was not Brown versus the Board of Education. It actually came earlier in our history under Harry S. Truman, when the armed forces were integrated, when Jim Crow went away after the World War. We scarcely talk about it, but the change in the military was the most profound. And when I was in Congress and would have town halls, I would talk about, people always lament the fact that there are strong opinions, deeply held convictions, because to some people, oh, you guys just argue for the sake of arguing. It's dots on one side and stripes on the other. You have to explain, no, it's not just playing politics. There are certain strongly held principles and convictions for which I stand. You may not agree with them, but one thing, and I would use the military, I would say, look at our men and women in uniform. There is not an R, there is not a D. Instead, there is the flag insignia on their uniforms. They represent one nation under God, indivisible. And now what's going on? The cultural Marxists are trying to tear up the military. When we come back, what went down yesterday at the confirmation hearing, courtesy of one of the newest Republican members of the U.S. Senate. Right now, let's step aside for news. JD Hayworth on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
.30 on the dot. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. Level 1 out of 5 risk for severe weather today. That's the lowest there is. Full forecast coming up in 2 minutes. Breaking news on the murder of a Murfreesboro woman. The Wilson County Sheriff says 3 people have been arrested and are charged in the death of Maya Fuller. Fuller's remains were found about a week after her family reported her missing in early August of last year. The 2 women and man are in custody. Their names are Tiana Tipton of Nashville, her brother Tyshawn Bowles of Nashville, and then Lamara Pipkin of Nashville. Right now in Murfreesboro, police are working to identify victims of rape who are in many videos and photos on a cell phone. The phone belongs to 38-year-old Emmanuel Webb, whom police say is already in jail on a rape charge. But now Murfreesboro police say there are more victims who may not even know it, because the victims in the videos are unconscious or asleep. That's the latest news. Weather is next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
Hi, I'm Paul Winkler. There was a recent study by JD Power looking at how happy investors were with their advisors, and it wasn't pretty. What they found was only 11% of the respondents said that they were getting comprehensive financial planning, that the fees were clear, and that they felt that the advisor was acting in their best interest. Not a good picture, 11%. Now, one of the things that we do is we do comprehensive planning. We fit all of those bills, number one. But one of the things I want to talk about is in the financial planning process, what I think it ought to look like and what is available that people aren't getting. And one of the things is called probability analysis. So in essence, this is what we're talking about. We're trying to accumulate money for retirement. Put money aside, hoping that we'll have enough so that we can have income throughout retirement. And what we find is that people have Social Security, they have pensions in their financial plan, and they also have investments. Now, with their investments, we want to do something very specific that it really requires quite an academic background to do this. And this is where we look at the cost of capital of the various things that you own in your investment portfolio. It sounds scary, it sounds really detailed, but here's the idea. Is if we look at various asset classes like large stocks and small stocks and large value and bonds and so on and so forth, we know the expected return or the cost that these entities have to pay to use your money. So we can come up with an expected return of the portfolio. We can also come up with what's called standard deviation, or how much that portfolio return may deviate from the expected return. Now that's a whole other video, but what I want to do is show you how we use this. If I look at a financial plan and I say, well, you got this area, this area, this area, what I can do is I can say, well, based on when you want to retire, this is how much income you can take, and here's the likelihood of being able to have this income survive throughout your entire life. And the way it works is this. If I take a portfolio and I say, there's the expected return, I can look at history and say, well, the way your portfolio is designed, how might your one-year returns vary from the expected return, the long-term expected return? Well, what we know from academic research is that portfolios well designed and properly managed in ways that I can't get into right now, it's too complicated, portfolios actually close in an expected return, but we don't know what the short-term returns are going to be. So what we do is we project out and say, well, what if the return that happened in 1936 is followed by the return that happened in 1975, which is followed by the return in 1995, or what if it's reversed? What if they happen in different orders? And we can do 1,000 iterations, different variations on when those and how those returns may come in. And what that does is, because we can't predict the future, what return is going to follow the other, we can figure out, is it likely that we are going to be able to take the income that we need throughout retirement from this portfolio? And if not, how can we rearrange the furniture or the portfolio to give us a higher likelihood of success? And we look at life expectancies, we look at a lot of different things, but this is what is available to people that they're not getting from the financial planning community. If you want to know more, go to paulwinkler.com, set up a free 15-minute phone call, paulwinkler.com, and come in and find out more about what we do.
"24 minutes until high noon. Heading down the home stretch on this Thursday gathering. Recovering United States Congressman JD Hayworth of Arizona coming to you from Scottsdale, the West's most western town, swimming pools, movie stars, and a nice warm day. 111 out here. And boy, if you want to see the complicit media, oh, it's hot, oh, it's going to break records. Why, Death Valley today may be 130, the highest temperature ever recorded. Hey, this world's been around a long time, but that's what they've got going. Hot's hot. It's the climate. It ain't climate change. Just try to keep that in mind. In fact, let's see, I think I have, and the air conditioning will keep you cool, but Dr. John F. Clauser, joint recipient of the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics, has criticized the climate emergency narrative, calling it, quote, a dangerous corruption of science that threatens the world's economy and the well-being of billions of people. Gee, there's Dr. Clauser, a Nobel Prize winner, saying he ain't going to choke on woke. And he's a true man of science. John Miltimore, I don't know if he's from Baltimore, but a tweet from his Substack column, woke is not hard to define. Miltimore says woke, social justice, intersectionality, and neo-Marxism masquerading as compassion for the poor and oppressed. See, we want our military to be awake. I don't want a military that's woke. I don't want a military like we see out of the crowd running it now, from Secretary Brown to silly Mark Milley to Biden's suggestion for the guy to succeed Mark Milley, who are so into woke, they're not awake when it comes to what the military is supposed to do: protect the United States. So, prior to the news, I played for you excerpts of a videotape that General Charles Q. Brown, the aforementioned nominee to succeed silly Mark Milley as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, what he had to say about how he's going to improve the Air Force. I tell you what, just to get perspective, it's worth a second listen. Millennial Mac, let's replay cut 12 if we could.
I'm thinking about how I can make improvements, personally, professionally, and institutionally, so that all airmen, both today and tomorrow, appreciate the value of diversity and can serve in an environment where they can reach their full potential. I think I don't have all the answers on how to create such an environment, whether here in PACAF or across our Air Force. I'm thinking about, without clear-cut answers, I just want to have the wisdom and knowledge to lead during difficult times like these. I want the wisdom and knowledge to lead, participate in, and listen to necessary conversations on racism, diversity, and inclusion.
Ding, 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 there it is. Racism, diversity, and inclusion, or diversion, well, it is a diversion from their primary duty, or diversity, inclusion, and equity. Now, we talked about how equity ain't equality. Equity is a combination of retribution, a big chunk of social justice. It's retribution, and it seeks not equality of opportunity, but equality of outcomes. Which brings us to the confirmation hearings for current Air Force Chief of Staff, General Charles Q. Brown, whom Joe Biden wants to, of course, now make the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I mentioned earlier in the show one Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt was the Attorney General of Missouri. He brought the suit along with other attorneys general about the collusion involving the FBI and other government agencies with prominent social media and internet firms. And as a result, the Judge Doty, last week didn't dither. He put forth an injunction forbidding federal bureaucrats from interacting with social media websites to essentially convey instructions from the big guy or from the big guy string pullers. Well, that same Eric Schmidt is now the junior senator from Missouri. And as a former prosecutor, without maliciousness, without raising his voice, Senator Schmidt asked a key question of General C.Q. Brown. Take a listen to it from yesterday's hearing. It's cut 13.
General, do we have too many white officers in the Air Force?
Senator, what I really look at is the quality of all the officers that we have, and we look at the aspect of everyone who's qualified, meets the qualifications, is promoted. And when
Well, I would agree with you, but that answer is not consistent with your August 9th memo. In your August 9th memo, you said that you signed on to that there should be a reduction, essentially, of about 9% of the white officers. That's 5,400. We have 5,400, too many white officers. And this is the real impact, I think, of this desire of the administration. I'm saddened to see this in this memo, of this obsession with sort of race-based politics being interjected into our military.
Bingo! The last frontier to politicize.
Bingo!
The one department that I used to talk about, the one facet of American life where duty, honor, country, and protection of the country and its citizens was most important. But now the Biden bunch want to politicize our military. I can remember as a kid, amidst the strife of the Vietnam War, CBS would do specials called CBS Reports. NBC would do documentaries called an NBC News White Paper. And no, it wasn't a play on words or racism at all. That's what they used to call a major research project, a white paper. Back before we got so hyperly sensitive about words black, white, yellow, brown, and all the euphemisms of hyphenated Americanism. The name of the documentary was Same Mud, Same Blood. And it offered a contrast from the inner cities of the late 1960s stateside in America with the violence on the streets and what our military experienced in the war in Southeast Asia, where trying to fight a guerrilla-based conflict in the rice paddies of Vietnam, the esprit de corps, one soldier looking out for another, all the racial questions were expunged because they were Americans fighting a war that may have been chronically mismanaged and micromanaged from back at the White House by one Lyndon Baines Johnson. But their battle for survival brought them through. Checking in from Nashville on line 1, it's Matt. Matt, welcome to the broadcast. Hi, Matt.
Hey, how you doing, sir? Yes, my comment is on this. Have they forgotten about the term McCarthyism when he basically tried to go after the military and the whole Red Scare, and look how well that worked out for him? It ruined his career. I mean, leave the military alone. That's all I'm saying.
I think that's advice well taken. I think you're right. You got to have a military that operates to protect the country. But what's happened to the military, they finally politicized it.
I mean, if you look at all throughout history, when people try to micromanage the military, things go poorly. Hitler tried to micromanage his military. Look how well that worked out for him. You know, and when Eisenhower took control of the military, all they said was, do what you got to do. And, of course, it was Truman that ordered the German atomic bomb. But, again, though, that was kind of more of, yes. So, I mean, I know it kind of contradicted it a little bit, but at the same time, too, though, Eisenhower, said, Eisenhower, do what you got to do. D-Day was on him.
The Eisenhower Doctrine, that's right. And what happened D-Day? Eisenhower had a brief statement. If the landings failed,
it's on me.
The fault is mine alone. not social, not being raised in a poor farm, not moving as a child from Denison, Texas to Abilene, Kansas, not getting mad as a kid and beating my fist to a pulp on a tree, none of that stuff of my environment. The price of leadership is accountability, not racial politics, not invented strife, and not diversity, inclusion, and equity. Matt, I want to thank you for the call, and God bless you.
You too. Thank you so much. Bye.
Made a lot of sense there. And just let me, before we move on, I heard from a Marine veteran. He heard this testimony. He said, oh, the cancer has metastasized. Can I tell you, this Marine veteran, a friend of mine from Arizona, held a challenging position in the United States Marine Corps in the midst of the conflict in Southeast Asia. One of his closest friends happened to be a black man from Mobile, Alabama. They remained lifelong friends because their esprit de corps was based on the training and challenge and orders to be executed that brought forth the camaraderie necessary that was a lifelong bond, not tempered in the strife of differences, but in the challenge and the cause of something bigger than themselves. As Matt said, leave the military alone to be the military. As Joe Biden, in his less than cognizant haze, can't seem to figure out, this is a perfect way to stir up trouble, to create racial resentment, to keep control. Yeah, what happens with the Chinese breathing down our neck? Oh, that's right, Joe, you're on the payroll. You don't give a tinker's damn. When we come back, we'll lighten the mood a bit. The biggest story you're not aware of, you used to lick it, now they're telling you to stick it. That's coming up. Dare I call this the 2-minute drill? Well, I will. One point I made earlier, kudos to Tucker Carlson. His Twitter video last week explored the curious connection between two prominent people in uniform. In the mid-'70s, they were seniors in high school, exclusive prep school outside of Boston, both on the football team. One, silly Mark Milley. The other, a guy named Richard Levine. You know who that is? You know the guy who's not really an admiral? Well, he's not really a woman. Calls himself Rachel Levine. Those guys were on the same football team. Figures. Before we go, this is the biggest story you missed. And I bet you thought that first you lick it, now you stick it was about the aforementioned item. No. The United States Postal Service on July 9th jacked up the mail prices. For a first-class stamp on a regular piece of mail, a 1-ounce letter, the price goes up 3 cents, from 63 cents to 66 cents. Now you see the wisdom of buying those forever stamps back when those forever stamps first came out, gosh, what, a decade ago? And just think, yeah, in the old days, we used to lick stamps, but now they come with that adhesive. Are they going to tell us that's for the increase? No, I got to tell you, postal workers a much better pension than members of Congress. Forget all that garbage you're reading on the email. At any rate, happy new forever stamps that don't last forever. Until we meet again, what fun this has been. JD Hayworth saying, stay brave, stay free, stay tuned, and thanks for listening.
From ABC